Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is trust and faith, which may be inseparable. So we're going to just sort of explore the phenomenon of trust and how it can enrich our lives when applied with discernment. And before we get started, we're just going to take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, good morning, Rosalind. Wonderful to have you here with us this morning, and welcome to everyone else who's joining us. Today, we're talking about trust and faith. And I think that one doesn't exist without the other. And so the question is, trust what? Have faith in what? And it's also important when we talk about trust and faith to be discerning as to what and where we're placing our trust and faith. So one of the things that I coach people into in the work that I do is being willing to know what we know. And what that means in so many instances is to be willing to trust our gut. When we have, for instance, an instinct, I'm just going to call it that, about another person, where we get sort of a clenching in the gut or just a bad feeling. And then we tend to try to override it with our thought saying, oh, no, you know, I'm looking for the diamond in everyone, the goodness in everyone. And yet your gut's telling you something's not right here. Being willing to know what we know is trusting the knowing that we have, trusting the instinct that we have that is kind of an internal radar, and having faith that it's guiding us in the right direction. And I can't say how many people, myself included, I've encountered who have overridden that knowing and gotten into a world of hurt. And after a few such instances that were relatively shattering for me, I learned to listen and to pay attention. And when we're talking about trust and faith, we're looking, I think, to cultivate a trust in ourselves, in our knowing, in our in our awareness. And that can be challenging because I imagine we've all done things that were not in alignment with our core being, things that we may have experienced embarrassment or shame around, or that we have berated ourselves for. And those instances can readily erode our sense of trust and faith in ourselves. And so the question is, how can we become trustworthy to ourselves, potentially to others, but more primarily, more importantly, to ourselves? And I think one of the ways that we can do that is by acknowledging and recognizing those times or instances where we stray from alignment within ourselves, where we do things or say things that we regret, at least in the moment, that we can find a path to use those instances as opportunities for deepening our awareness and our learning and our connection with ourselves by cultivating curiosity around that behavior, for example. Like, where did that come from? What prompted that? What's underlying it? What might be the source of that reaction, that behavior? And to be applying our curiosity with compassion to recognize that those behaviors that we do, that we then feel shame around or regret or disappointment in ourselves or judgment in ourselves, that those instances of, shall we call it, acting out, are coming from a history, are coming from a wound, most likely, that is begging to be explored, healed, dissolved, addressed in any case. And so one of the premises that I work from is that if it's coming up to heal. And we often treat emotion as it arises, or even behavior as it arises, as a problem, rather than as a harbinger. Harbinger is a harsh word, but a calling to pay attention, to address something that it's time to address. Oftentimes the way these things come up for us is painful, right? We experience upset, at the very least, as these things arise in many cases. But that upset, the fact that there is upset, is a signal to say, hey, pay attention. There's something juicy here. There's something rich here. that we can address. And so when we go back to this notion of trust, it's kind of be willing to trust the process. And what is that process? You know, we hear that phrase all the time, but okay, so I'm willing to trust the process. What's the process? So the process is perhaps life unfolding and being our teacher. And so if we can cultivate a trust that life is happening for us and through us rather than to us, then we can take the opportunities that it presents as opportunities rather than as setbacks per se. So it may look like we're experiencing a setback. It may look like we're experiencing, and it may feel like we're experiencing breakdown and setback and upheaval and disappointment. The thing is that chaos or upheaval or upset is often what it takes to recognize a need for a shift of perspective, a shift of awareness. So it's only when we upset the apple cart, so to speak, that we might recognize that there's a wheel that needs fixing, or in our case, healing, evolution. Our growth and change happens with fits and starts. And although it would be lovely to be coaxed into and invited into change with joy and open-heartedness, the change is often accompanied by disruption. Change is disruption, right? It's disruption of an existing pattern. So as we move into this disruption, it really helps to have trust and faith in the process of life itself as it unfolds. And sometimes circumstances are so deeply disturbing and disruptive and challenging and painful that it's hard to maintain that perspective or to cultivate that perspective. And it takes an act of will. If we are able to engage that act of will, if we are able to presence ourselves to the act of will of life is happening for me and through me, we can move from potential victimhood to claiming our sovereignty, to claiming our power within our lives, to claim life and to seek then opportunity rather than feeling at the effect of life. And we've all been in places where that hasn't been accessible to us. And sometimes it takes time to be able to get to a place where the storm has passed, whether it's a reactive storm or a storm of whatever that challenge is. And then when there's a moment to take a breath, we can rediscover ourselves. We can reclaim ourselves and reclaim that choice. So placing our trust requires discernment about what we're trusting. And that's where we get to cultivate sort of a higher connection, a deeper centeredness, a deeper presence to recognizing the signals, particularly the signal from our gut, to discern, to distinguish whether this is a good place, for example, to place our trust. And I think what can be a place of challenge for so many of us, it has been for me in the past, is to trust someone, to trust outside of myself more than myself, because I felt lost. I felt disconnected. I didn't feel trust in myself and placed trust outside of myself. And that in its way can be deeply problematic. As children, we don't really have the choice to not trust outside of ourselves because we're dependent upon externals for our well-being, for our food, for our shelter, for clarifying the world for us. And I don't know exactly when it occurs that we start cultivating our self-trust. I know a sense of self happens around funny enough that what we call the terrible twos, because that's when we're starting to assert ourselves and our own choices and our own preferences, which are often ground out of us, where we're taught to obey and be the word subservient is coming to mind. I grew up with children should be seen and not heard. I don't think I'm the only one. So when do we reclaim that sovereignty in our lives? When do we reclaim an ability to start trusting in ourselves, or maybe claim for the first time to be able to distinguish our own knowing from what we're told and what we're taught? Like something's not quite right here. When do we get that feeling that we can then start recognizing and honoring? So I'm wondering, there have been instances in my life where I had believed reality to be a certain way, believed a person, for example, to believe a certain way, and then they weren't. And what I noticed was that my judgment had been very, very misguided, and that shook me to my core. Rosalind says, getting past the second guessing. Right. And so here's the thing, getting past the second guessing is a challenge if you've experienced something like I was just describing, where I realized that my judgment had been poor. And when I went back and looked more carefully, what I realized is that I had that hit. I had that hit of knowing, but then I overrode it. and justified it because I really wanted things to be a different way. So I wanted things to be one way, and I had gotten a hit that they weren't. And then I justified my choice, and that's where I went down the road that ended up being at least rocky, if not actually devastating. And that happened more than once. And I think, I think it's important to be able to look at those instances in our lives and say, well, what's the dynamic there? What happened? Not to say, oh, I'm so stupid, or how could I have done that? How could I not have noticed? How, rather than that, which is, I think, something that many of us indulge in. And if we indulge in it, maybe just curtail it more quickly, allow ourselves to put an end to that more quickly so that we can say, okay, so what really happened there? How did that happen? And I really wanted things to be the way I wanted them to be, even though they weren't, and even though I had indicators that they weren't. And so I can learn so that next time, when faced with something like that, I have the opportunity to choose differently, to be more aware, to pay more respect to the knowing that I have, to get to a place where we can trust ourselves more. It takes cultivating it, sometimes in small steps, right? Can I trust myself to do this or that or the other thing? And to really be willing to face ourselves with the courage to see something that maybe isn't comfortable to see about ourselves. To notice, oh, you know what? I I did know that, and I denied it. I went past it. I can't tell you, I mean, this is the case for myself, but I can't tell you how many times I've talked to other people who've gotten themselves into really sticky situations and felt victimized by what occurred. And so many times I've said, but did you know? Did you know? And were you just being unwilling to know what you knew? And so many times people have said yes, they knew. They knew better. It's just a matter of having the willingness to pay attention. The thing is, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt. We want to be seeing the best in people. Good morning, Jackie. Welcome. So wonderful to have you joining us today as we're talking about trust and faith and discernment. Really is learning to pay attention, to be willing to know what we know rather than explain it away. And the knowing that I'm talking about isn't sticking to a belief or holding to a point of view, but the kind of knowing that comes from our gut, the gut instinct to say, something's not right here. And as we come to allow ourselves to pay more attention and to trust that, that's how we can rebuild trust in ourselves. At least that's what worked for me. And I've seen it work for others, where we can step by step rebuild the trust in ourselves to listen, and then that can populate out or filter out into our other choices and our willingness to kind of be guided. So trust is one of those things. It's a little sticky sometimes. And ultimately, when we're centered, when we're grounded, cultivating the trust in ourselves and our own knowing that's beyond just what we believe, more into our intuitive sense, can really be a source of great richness and fulfillment in our lives. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it's a deep, deep pleasure and privilege to be able to have these conversations on the nature of being here with you. And so until next time.